Welcome to the First Fill. My name is Katie Meyer, and I serve as the Senior Director of Content Creation here at APHA, and I am very excited to be your host. I'm here live in Nashville, Tennessee, with my esteemed colleague, mentor, and friend, Remington Award winner Dr. Dan Hussar. If you've completed APHA's Pharmacy Today CPE on new drugs over the past 15 to 20 years, you're familiar with Dr. Hussar's updates, and I'm delighted to have him as a guest today. If you haven't caught episode 1 this month, be sure to check that out as we discuss 2 new recent drug approvals that pharmacists should be on the lookout for. Today, Dr. Hussar will provide us with information about his approach to evaluating new drug approvals and provide pharmacists with recommendations for staying up to date on the latest and greatest in pharmacy amidst a busy life. So welcome, Dr. Hussar.
Thank you, Katie.
To start, could you introduce yourself and provide listeners with a bit of background information about how, when, and why new drugs became your area of focus?
Well, Katie, I wish I could say that I came up with the initial idea. But one of my mentors, Linwood Tice, who was the dean of the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy, past president of APHA, um, hired me to the faculty of the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy. And he was the editor of the American Journal of Pharmacy, which was a pretty low circulation journal that the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy published. And for a number of years prior to my coming to pharmacy school, he had written an annual article on new drugs. Now, this is ancient history, and this was before the time that pharmacists were educated to assume responsibility for patients' drug therapy. So we were not, and he was not at that point, an advocate for pharmacists communicating with patients about the drugs. He wanted to keep pharmacists informed of what the newest drugs in our area were. Now, when he became very busy, during the period of time he was dean and also president of APHA, he didn't have enough time to do that. And he asked me if I would want to succeed him in developing those annual articles. And I know that all of this says is how old I am, but my first article on new drugs was the new drugs of 1968-69. And 2 years because I had to catch up on a year that he didn't have time to do it. But I just found it was a learning experience for me. And at that time, part of our presentation was the chemical structures. That was a big part of a pharmacist's education then. But I enjoyed doing that. At that time, there weren't as many new drugs reaching the market each year as there are now. And as we did it, as pharmacists had not only the opportunities, but requirements to participate in continuing education programs. This became a topic that I was asked to speak on. And at that time, pharmaceutical companies weren't really sponsoring educational programs, sort of come full cycle. And it has become an opportunity for me not only to write about the articles, but to then speak about them. And that has provided a wonderful professional opportunity from which I have learned so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I honestly didn't know that story, and we've known each other for a very long time, so that's great. So, with that, next, let's talk a little bit about your approach to evaluating a new drug that comes out to the market. So, can you tell listeners just about your general approach, some of the characteristics that you consider when you're looking at a new drug's potential?
When I learn a new drug has been approved, I will, first of all, get the product labeling, the package insert, and learn as much as I can about that. Whether they're typically for new drugs, there is very little, if any, in the way of published literature, even on the research studies. Some of them are proprietary, and some of them just or too recent to get into the publication cycle. Um, but as I look at the new drug information, initially it was essentially reporting on the different components of the clinical studies, the uses. But as I progressed year to year, the questions I would get the most often about new drugs is how does the new drug compare with older drugs with which I'm already familiar?
Mhm.
Does it have advantages? Does it have disadvantages? So I think it was in 2002, I developed nothing magical about it, but a numerical rating system. And as I would look at the information on the new drug, and my approach is to try to provide the information that is most practical for pharmacists, physicians, patients to utilize, to understand and utilize. So that was a focus. I wouldn't go into great detail on the research studies. If the FDA approved it, somebody has pretty thoroughly analyzed the studies and information. Um, so, what I would do in response, I developed this rating system on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest rating. And I would not be very generous in giving a rating of 5. Typically, it would be for a new drug for which there was for a condition for which there was no previous treatment. And that might be a rare drug that most
Mhm.
pharmacists are not going to see or get a prescription for or even get a question about it. And what I would do when I had the information about the new drug, I would identify, where possible, and usually it is, what agents previously have been used for this treatment. And I'd look for the background information on those agents and identify the one to which the new drug was most comparable. And then I would develop what I would identify as advantages of the new drug as well as the disadvantages. And then I pull those together and provide my rating for the new drug.
Mhm.
And that's been a source of enjoyment too, because as is true for almost every area of drug therapy, there can be differences of opinion.
Yep.
And depending on where an individual is working, the prescribers in their area. So we can have a little fun with that in the presentation and asking the audience how they would rate a new drug. And typically we're right on target, perhaps from the bias of my comments, but otherwise. So try to focus on the most practical things for, I mean, at an APHA meeting, the activities of a group that would be attending my session would be widespread.
Mhm.
I mean, community, hospital, long term care, stockbrokers,
Yeah.
lawyers. It's so anyway. I then determine a rating from 1 to 5. Now, fortunately, there aren't many ones, which is basically no
No good.
advantages. And after all, if a company's going to invest that much money in doing research on a new drug, you got to hope that there is something that sets it apart from the previous ones. And that so I've added that to my presentations. Typically, my presentations, because they're more interactive than a journal article would be, and I think is of value to the audience. And I've had individuals say that on evaluations, and that they appreciate that because it gets them thinking. You
Yep.
know, in my experience, how do I view that drug? Is it the same way?
Yep. Yeah, no, I love that perspective. It definitely like gives you perspective in terms of how effective or how often you're going to be seeing the drug, really, compared to the other agents that are out there for sure. So that's awesome. All right, so let's shift gears over to the patient a little bit, right? So, what are some of the factors that pharmacists should consider when they're determining what that most appropriate information is to relay to the patient that comes to their counter inquiring about a new drug?
Well, that's a very important question, Katie, because with the package information leaflets that are now provided to patients, I mean, first of all, many patients don't have good reading ability. And to see one page, 2 page of patient instructions, this is what you need to know. A lot of people aren't going to persevere through that. So, I mean, in terms of a pharmacist working in a pharmacy and having pertinent information provided on a computer, I mean, we both have heard or are aware of the fatigue
Mhm.
alert of the alert fatigue, where so much comes up. You've got to make a judgment in terms of what is most important for a patient to know. So, the approach I would take there, first of all, aspects of administering the drug. Let's say a capsule or a tablet, the most convenient oral dosage form. Is there any recommendation with regard to administration with respect to meals or apart from meals? And some of the drugs I'll be discussing at the session tomorrow have that consideration. So that is very important. Does the patient understand what the benefits of the medication are? And it's important that um, the pharmacist have the awareness of drug interactions. And sometimes we think of drug interactions as involving prescription medications with other prescription medications. Well, the OTC drugs, dietary supplements, St. John's wort can interact with so many things. So just a complete awareness on the pharmacist's part of what other products the patient is using. And then what I do is emphasize the most common adverse events and then lightly or quickly identify some serious, not that, I mean, usually there's the serious reactions are so rare that most pharmacists in their lifetime experience are not going to observe or have patients who experience those. But for example, penicillins and the importance of ruling out any history of penicillin allergy, and the fact that the penicillins are related to the cephalosporins and a new carbapenem I'm going to be speaking about tomorrow. So that if there's an allergy to one, it's going to transfer to the other medications with similar structures and properties.
Yep. No, all of that makes perfect sense, and really focusing on the most important thing that
Mhm.
they can take away, and those big things to be on the lookout for. So to
Yeah.
not scare them too, right? We don't want to scare them away because then they won't take the medication in the
Uh,
first place, and it'll
Right,
become a moot
right. So
point.
I think emphasizing the intended benefit
Yep.
for which it is used, but even the more common side effects may not affect more than 10% of it.
Sure.
So the typical patient that comes in, they're not going to experience any
Right.
problem.
Right. Yep. Awesome. Well, last but not least, I remember vividly, honestly, as a pharmacy student sitting in your office wondering how in the heck you stay up to date with everything. And I asked you that question. I don't know if you remember that, but I still remember it. And I still use some of the strategies that you told me to stay up to date, today. So was just hoping you can tell our listeners a little bit about some strategies and resources or recommendations to help them stay up to date with all that's going on in pharmacy.
Well, who admittedly, when I was a full time faculty member that had a professional focus on this area, as I still do in retirement, have more time than a busy practicing pharmacist to look at the properties of the drug, to stay as up to date as possible. The last thing I want to see happen is to be at a presentation where I'm speaking on new drugs and have a pharmacist come up to me after the meeting and say, "Oh, what do you think about this drug that was just approved 2 days ago?" And no, I want to know about. I should know about that drug that was approved 2 days ago, or even yesterday, or even this morning. So, keeping up, I follow very closely the FDA approvals, and you can actually get on an FDA distribution email distribution site that will communicate information about new drugs. If the new drug is of particular importance, the FDA will typically develop a press release. Now, on the FDA website, there is a record at, that of new drug approvals. Now, one of them is approvals of all types, not only new drugs, but a new indication, a manufacturing change. I mean, that could be mind boggling and trying to sort through all that. But there is another option to go to the original new drug application or biological license application to access that information, which is much shorter. So I will check that frequently. And and then there's several journals that sometimes have publications of drugs that are not yet approved. I mean, New England Journal of Medicine being one example of that. So I will follow that information. Um, I remember the days when I would used to call or write the manufacturer to have a copy of the print package insert sent to me. Well, now I can quickly access the package insert almost a minute after it appears as an approval. And typically it's the brand name of the drug.com. And I can almost immediately access the patient insert, the package insert for that drug. So that's part of the approach that I use. I also, oftentimes, the company will provide a press release. I mean, actually, they'll issue press releases for every new drug that they get approved, but and the FDA for selected new drugs. The company press release, I mean, as you would expect, I mean, it has to be balanced. It has to include the risks, but it also provides some background information about the medication, the history of its development, also about the condition. And I'll be the first to say that sometimes the first time I ever heard about the condition being treated is when the first drug is
Right.
approved to treat it. So that's a learning process too. So it's a combination of factors, and I typically try to access at least one current lay publication. Wall Street Journal, for example, will be right on top of important approvals, and they'll put their reporting and editorial background. They've searched out the information also from a different perspective, the news perspective, rather than the news plus professional perspective, I would add.
Right. Yeah. No, that's great. A lot of great tips there. I remember from sitting in your office the FDA as a resource, but I feel like you might have added those other ones since since back in what 2006, and I'm dating myself as well. So, thanks so much for sharing with listeners today. It was definitely a great conversation, and I appreciate it very much. All right, so I'm going to take a moment to just summarize major takeaways from our time here today. First, when considering new drug approvals, it's often quite beneficial to compare the new drug to other medications that are currently on the market to determine advantages, disadvantages, and that can really help formulate a mindset around what to communicate with patients as well, right? So, focusing in on those application based things, such as should the patient take the medication with food? How often should they be taking it? And then maybe the top side effects. And then last but not least, you can certainly subscribe to FDA for any new drug approvals, and then follow even maybe a non-medical journal like Wall Street Journal to get some information there as well. So, with that, that's all the time we have here for today. Like I said, if you haven't listened to part one of this month's First Fill podcast yet, it was released just last week. In that episode, we discussed two new recent drug approvals for pharmacists to be on the lookout for. If you enjoyed this month's update on new drugs, be sure to check out our March Pharmacy Today CPE in the Learning Library for a deeper dive into additional agents that have come to market recently. And then last but not least, don't forget to visit the Learning Library to earn your CE for this month's podcast at learn.pharmacist.com. Take care, and thanks so much for listening.